The story is titled, A Plastic Fork and 600 Nights. The tunnel no one saw coming. The first thing that breaks isn't your spirit. It's your sense of time. Outside, you measure life in hours, paychecks, weekends. Inside Blackwater Correctional, you measure it in heartbeats and head count. The bus ride in was a blur of gray highway and the metallic taste of adrenaline that had turned sour in my throat. I remember looking at my hands, cuffed to a belly chain, and realizing they didn't look like my hands anymore. They looked like property. My name is Elias Thorne, 28, male, and I came to Blackwater with a 15-year sentence for armed robbery and vehicular manslaughter. I didn't pull the trigger, and I didn't drive the car into that minivan, but the law doesn't care about the difference between the driver and the gunman when a kid dies in the back seat of the other car. Guilt is heavy, heavier than the chains. It sits in your chest like wet concrete, hardening a little more every day until you can barely draw breath around it. Processing was a factory line of humiliation. You strip, you cough, you squat. You lose your name and get a number. The guards looked at us not with anger, but with a terrifying boredom. That's what scared me the most, the indifference. To them, we were just meat to be stored in a locker. The air inside the intake block smelled of bleach, unwashed bodies, and that distinct copper scent of old rust. It was the smell of a place that had been rotting from the inside out for decades. They marched me to C Block, the overflow unit. The heat hit me first. This was deep Mississippi July, and the ventilation system had died back in the 90s. The air hung thick and yellow, trapped between layers of peeling paint. My cell was a 6x8 concrete box that felt more like a tomb than a room. That's where I met Silas Vance, 58, male. He was sitting on the bottom bunk, reading a paperback with the cover torn off. He didn't look up when the gate slammed shut behind me, a sound that vibrated in my teeth. Silas had been inside for 30 years, a lifer who had survived by becoming part of the furniture. He was wire-thin, with skin that looked like tanned leather and eyes that had seen everything and decided none of it was worth a reaction. "Top bunk," Silas said, his voice like gravel grinding together. "Don't hang your towel on the bars. Graves doesn't like it." Officer Graves, 44, male, was the C Block sergeant. I met him an hour later during the evening count. He wasn't a big man, but he carried himself with the twitchy, coiled energy of a dog that's been kicked too many times and is looking for something to bite. He walked the tier, tapping his baton against the bars. Clack, 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 a rhythm that made your stomach drop. He stopped at our cell. He looked at me, then at the fresh bruises on my wrists from the cuffs. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "New fish," Graves said softly. "You look soft, Thorne. You look like you break easy." He reached through the bars, grabbed my mattress, and yanked it halfway off the bunk, dumping my meager pile of issued linens onto the dirty floor. "Fix it," he whispered. "And if I see a wrinkle, you sleep on the concrete." I scrambled to pick them up, my hands shaking. I felt the heat of shame burning my neck. I wanted to say something, to defend myself, but Silas kicked my ankle hard from the bottom bunk. A warning. I kept my mouth shut. That first night, the darkness wasn't silent. The prison breathes at night. You hear coughing, weeping, the flush of toilets, the distant slam of steel. I laid on the thin, lumpy mattress, staring at the ceiling where someone had scratched, "God is dead," into the paint. I thought about the kid in the minivan. I thought about the sunlight I wouldn't see without a fence in front of it for 15 years. I thought I was going to die in there. "Breathe, kid," Silas whispered from the darkness below. "You panic, you drown. You gotta turn off the part of you that wants to go home. Kill it, or it'll kill you." I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I just listened to the rust eating the iron, waiting for morning. The advice Silas gave me, to kill the part of myself that wanted to go home, didn't take. Hope is a parasite. You can starve it, beat it, and bury it under layers of cynicism. but it feeds on the smallest things. A glimpse of the sky, the smell of rain before a storm. For the first 6 months, I lived in a state of sleepwalking terror, moving through the routine like a ghost haunting my own body. The routine is the real warden. It's not the walls, it's the rhythm. Up at 05 thou, count. Breakfast, lukewarm oatmeal that tastes like wet cardboard. Work, count, yard, count, lockup. The days bleed into weeks, and the weeks turn into a gray sludge that coats your mind. You stop looking at faces. You stop asking questions. You just follow the boots in front of you. I got assigned to maintenance detail because I had steady hands and didn't talk much. It was a coveted spot, not because it was easy, but because it got you out of the cell block and into the bowels of Blackwater. Down there, amidst the hissing steam pipes and the groaning boilers, the air was suffocatingly hot, but it was private. Marcus Red O'Malley, 35, male, ran the tool crib. He was a trustee with a jagged scar running from his ear to his chin, a souvenir from a riot in '08. Red was the economy of the basement. He traded cigarettes for favors and favors for silence. He handed me a wrench on my first day with a look that said he knew exactly how much my life was worth. Nothing. "Keep your head down, Thorne," Red muttered, sliding a clipboard across the counter. "Graves is on a tear. He's looking for a rabbit to skin." He was right. Officer Graves had fixated on me. It wasn't just the bed sheets anymore. It was the way he'd stand behind me while I ate, his breath hitting the back of my neck, waiting for me to flinch. He'd kick my heels in the hallway, just enough to make me stumble, then write me up for disruptive behavior if I reacted. He was bored, and I was his entertainment. The breaking point didn't come with a bang. It came on a Tuesday, deep in the sub-basement behind the laundry sector. I was tasked with patching a leaking steam line that ran along the outer foundation wall. The heat was ferocious, a physical weight that pressed against my eyeballs. I was on my knees, sweat stinging a fresh cut on my brow, scraping away layers of calcified rust from a pipe that looked like it had been installed during the Carter administration. My wrench slipped. It struck the concrete wall behind the pipe. Thud. It wasn't a sharp crack of solid concrete. It was a dull, hollow thud. I froze. I looked over my shoulder. The guard on duty, a kid named Miller who spent his shifts texting on a contraband phone, wasn't looking. I tapped the wall again. Thud. Thud. The concrete here was rotten. Decades of leaking steam and condensation had turned the mortar into chalk. I pressed my thumb against a hairline fracture and pushed. A chunk of the wall, the size of a fist, crumbled inward, falling into a dark void behind the masonry. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. I shone my penlight into the hole. It wasn't just a gap. It was a service chase. A narrow vertical shaft used for the old ventilation system, long since bypassed. It smelled of wet earth and dead rats. I quickly packed the hole with gray pipe putty, smearing it with grease and dust to hide the repair. I finished the shift with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. That night, the cell block was vibrating with tension. A fight had broken out on the tier above. Shouting, the wet slap of skin on skin, then the heavy boots of the response team. In the chaos, I leaned over the edge of my bunk. "Silas," I whispered. The old man didn't move. He was staring at the ceiling, his hands folded on his chest like a corpse. "If you're going to tell me you found Jesus, save it." "I found a way out," I said. The words tasted like metal. Silas sat up slowly. The apathy vanished from his eyes, replaced by a sharp, predatory focus. He looked at the bars, then back at me. "Talk fast, and talk quiet." I told him about the hollow wall, the service chase, the location behind the boilers. I told him how the steam masked the noise and how the guard, Miller, never looked up. Silas listened, his face unreadable, absorbing the details like a sponge. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. Then, he reached under his mattress and pulled out a small, flattened piece of metal. a shiv made from a sharpened spoon handle. He held it up to the dim light. "That shaft," Silas said, his voice barely audible over the screaming on the upper tier. "It leads to the old storm drains. I saw the blueprints 30 years ago when I worked in the records office before they digitized everything. I knew it was there. I just didn't know where it connected inside." "Why didn't you use it?" I asked. He looked at his hands, arthritis knotting the knuckles. "Because getting into the shaft is the easy part, kid. The storm drains have a grate at the river exit. Solid steel. You can't cut it. You have to blow it." "Blow it?" "Pressure," Silas whispered, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time. "We don't need explosives. We need steam. You're a plumber now, aren't you? If we divert the main line into that drain, we turn the whole pipe into a cannon." Just then, the lock on our cell clicked. The gate slid open with a screech. Officer Graves stood there. He wasn't smiling this time. He held a crumpled piece of paper in his hand, a letter I had written to my mother, begging her to appeal my case. He tore it in half, then in quarters, letting the pieces flutter to the floor. "Random search," Graves said, his eyes dead and cold. He stepped inside, crowding my space. "Strip, both of you." He knew. He couldn't know about the hole, but he knew something had shifted. He could smell the hope on me, and he was here to strangle it. As I unbuttoned my shirt, humiliated and shaking with rage, I looked at Silas. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. We weren't just inmates anymore. We were conspirators. And Graves had just made a mistake. He thought he was breaking us, but he was only hardening the resolve. The plan wasn't just about freedom now, it was about survival. And for the first time, I realized that getting out might require leaving Graves behind in pieces. We spent the next 6 weeks building a bomb out of silence and steam. The preparation wasn't a montage of clever tricks. It was a slow, grinding misery that settled into my joints like arthritis. Every day in the maintenance block was a gamble. I had to loosen the corroded bolts on the bypass valve, a massive iron wheel rusted shut since the 80s, without breaking them or leaving wrench marks bright enough for Miller to see. I worked in quarter turns. Creak. Stop. Wait for the boiler to hiss. Creak. Stop. My hands were raw, the knuckles stripped of skin, constantly greasy to hide the fresh blood. Silas did the mental heavy lifting. He mapped the shift changes, the blind spots, the exact 10-second window when the laundry carts rumbled loudly enough to mask the sound of a wall crumbling. He stopped eating dinner, smuggling lumps of bread and packets of peanut butter back to the cell in his socks. We were stockpiling calories for a run we might not survive. "Fear makes you heavy," Silas told me one night, watching me pace 3 steps forward, 3 steps back. "You're telegraphing, Elias. You look like a man waiting for the hangman." "Graves knows," I whispered. "He's just waiting for the right time to pull the string." I wasn't paranoid. Officer Graves had changed tactics. He stopped the petty harassment. No more kicked heels or tossed cells. Instead, he watched. He'd stand at the end of the maintenance corridor, arms crossed, just staring at the back of my head while I worked. He was letting the pressure build, waiting for me to make a mistake. The mistake didn't come from me. It came from Red O'Malley. 2 days before we planned to go, Red cornered me in the tool crib. He leaned over the counter, the scar on his face twisting as he lowered his voice. "Graves put in a work order. Infrastructure audit. He's bringing a contractor down here on Monday to inspect the foundation walls, specifically behind the boilers." My stomach dropped through the floor. It wasn't an audit. It was an excavation. Graves had figured out I was messing with the wall. He just didn't know why yet. Monday was 3 days away. "Why are you telling me?" I asked, gripping a wrench so hard my fingers went white. Red spat on the floor. "Because Graves owes me 50 packs from the poker game in B Block and he's refusing to pay. I hope you make it, Thorne, or I hope you kill him. I don't care which." We couldn't wait for the weekend. We had to go that night. The plan was ugly and desperate. During the 16-hours count, usually the most chaotic time as shifts changed, I would slip away from the detail return line and hide in the laundry chute room. Silas, who worked the library cart, had to find a way to get down there. If either of us missed the mark, the alarms would sound before we even touched the steam valve. I made it to the sub-basement, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The heat was ferocious. I crawled behind the massive industrial dryers, dust clogging my throat, and waited. 10 minutes felt like 10 years. Then a shadow detached itself from the gloom. Silas. He looked old, tired, but his eyes were hard as flint. "Let's go," he mouthed. We reached the access point behind the boilers. I had already loosened the mortar. I pulled the loose bricks away, revealing the dark throat of the service shaft. The air rushing out was cold and smelled of river mud. "Get in," I whispered to Silas. "I have to divert the line." I grabbed the heavy pipe wrench I'd hidden weeks ago. I needed to turn the bypass valve, sending the full pressure of the prison's boiler system down the dormant line toward the storm drain grate. It would be like a cannon shot, enough pressure to blow the rusty bolts of the exit grate into the river. I latched the wrench onto the valve wheel. It groaned. I put my weight into it. "Thorne." The voice didn't come from the tunnel. It came from the catwalk above. I froze. I looked up. Officer Graves was standing on the metal grating, a flashlight in one hand and his baton in the other. He wasn't radioing for backup. He was smiling. "I knew it," Graves said, his voice echoing over the hiss of the steam. "I knew you were a rat looking for a hole." He descended the metal stairs slowly, savoring it. He wanted this. He didn't want to arrest me. He wanted to break me in the dark where no one could see. He wanted to be the one who snuffed out the light. "Step away from the valve, Elias," he said, tapping the baton against his leg. "Thack. Thack. And maybe I only break one of your legs." I looked at the valve. Then I looked at the dark hole where Silas was hiding. Then I looked at the steam gauge. The pressure was in the red. I didn't step away. I grabbed the valve with both hands and ripped it downward with everything I had left. Every ounce of rage, every swallowed insult, every night I'd stared at the ceiling wishing for death. The valve screamed open. A jet of superheated steam erupted from a fractured seal I hadn't seen, not into the pipe, but outward. A white, scalding curtain of death directly between me and Graves. Graves shrieked, stumbling back, dropping his baton as the heat blistered the air. The noise was deafening, a banshee wail of escaping pressure. "Go!" Silas yelled, grabbing my belt and hauling me toward the hole. I didn't look back at Graves. I didn't care if he was burned or blind. I dove into the darkness of the wall, the rough concrete scraping the skin off my shoulders, pulling the loose bricks back into place just as the boiler room alarms finally began to scream. We were in the veins of the prison now. There was no going back. Ahead of us lay 300 yards of pitch-black pipe, a grate that might not have blown, and the suffocating realization that the only way out was through. The tunnel was tight, a concrete throat swallowing us whole. There was no light, only the terrifying claustrophobic pressure of the earth above and the searing heat of the steam chasing us from behind. I crawled on my hands and knees, the rough aggregate tearing through my pants, shredding skin. Ahead of me, I could hear Silas wheezing, a wet, ragged sound that echoed in the dark. We moved like blind worms. The air grew heavier, pressurized by the diverted steam line we had just unleashed. My ears popped. The heat was rising, a physical wave pushing against our backs. If the grate at the river exit didn't give, if the bolts held, we would be boiled alive in this tube. Then, the world shook. A dull, concussive thud vibrated through the concrete floor, followed immediately by a rushing roar, the sound of a dam breaking. The pressure vanished in an instant, sucked forward into the vacuum. A draft of cold, rotting air hit my face. It's open! Silas's voice cracked, sounding small in the sudden vastness of the noise. We scrambled forward, no longer caring about the scrapes or the darkness. The tunnel ended abruptly. One moment I was crawling on concrete. The next, I was falling. I hit the water hard. It was shocking, violent cold. The Blackwater River. I went under, the current grabbing me, twisting me, dragging me down into the silt. For a second, I panicked, flailing against the weight of my boots. Then I kicked, my lungs burning, and broke the surface. The night air tasted like mud and diesel, but it was sweet. I gasped, treading water, spinning in the current to find Silas. "Silas!" I hissed, the fear spiking again. A pale shape surfaced near the bank, clinging to a submerged tree root. I swam over, fighting the river, and grabbed his jacket. He was dead weight, his lips blue, shivering so violently his teeth clattered. I dragged him up the muddy bank into the cover of the reeds. We lay there for a long time, gasping, covered in slime, listening to the distant sirens wailing back at the prison. The complex was a mile upstream, glowing like a radioactive sore on the horizon. Searchlights swept the sky, but they were looking for runners on the road, not ghosts in the river. Silas sat up, coughing up river water. He looked older than I had ever seen him, a skeleton wrapped in wet denim. He looked at the prison lights, then at me. "You go," he whispered. "Don't wait." "We stick to the plan," I said, though I knew the plan had dissolved the moment we hit the water. "No," Silas shook his head. "I'm slow. I'm done. I got a sister in Baton Rouge. If I make it, I make it. But you run, Elias. You run until you forget your name." He didn't say goodbye. He just turned and vanished into the tree line, a shadow slipping back into the world he had left 30 years ago. I never saw him again. That was 4 years ago. I go by David now. I work construction in a town near the Canadian border where the winters are long enough to kill the memories. I live in a basement apartment that smells of damp wood, not bleach. I pay my taxes. I keep my head down. But I am not free. Freedom is a lie they tell you to keep you behaving. The truth is, the prison stays with you. It's in the way I wake up at 04:59 every morning, heart hammering, waiting for a bell that never rings. It's in the way I eat, shoveling food into my mouth, guarding my plate with my forearm, scanning the room for threats that aren't there. I can't stand open spaces. When I go to the grocery store, I panic in the aisles. Too many choices, too many colors. I find myself walking near the walls, seeking the comfort of a perimeter. And then there's Officer Graves. I don't know if he died in that boiler room. I checked the news for weeks after, but the prison system buries its embarrassments. There was a report of an accident at Blackwater, a maintenance failure that resulted in injuries, but no names. Sometimes when I'm walking home in the dark, I hear the clack, clack, clack of a baton on a thigh. I smell the old spice he used to drown out the scent of the block. I freeze, sweating in the freezing wind, waiting for a hand to grab my shoulder. It never does. But the fear is there, a cold iron spike in my gut. I have a woman now. Her name is Sarah. She thinks I'm quiet because I'm shy. She thinks the scars on my back are from a car accident. Last night, she touched my arm while I was sleeping, and I nearly broke her wrist before I woke up. The look in her eyes, fear, pure and raw, was the same look I used to see in the mirror in C Block. I sat on the edge of the bed, shaking, apologizing, but I couldn't explain. I couldn't tell her that I'm not really here. I'm still back there, in the dark, holding a wrench, waiting for the steam to burn me clean. I escaped the walls, but I carried the cage with me. The iron doesn't hold you anymore, but the weight of it. The weight never leaves. I am a free man, but every time I close my eyes, I hear the lock click shut.